14 days until unimaginable World War III escalation. According to numerous NATO officials, they are saying that at the upcoming summit in Vilnius, in Lithuania, where 31 countries are about to congregate and discuss how they can cause the collapse of the Russian Empire without it leading to nuclear war, that they're going to do something incredibly dumb. They're going to straddle one of Russia's reddest of red lines, redder than the Soviet Union flag. I'm talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO, or in the very least security guarantees, which are tantamount to essentially putting nuclear weapons on Russia's doorstep. This is not going to end good for anybody. And if you don't think I'm serious, then you're going to have to listen to what Liz Truss has to say in this video today. Defense ministers, prime ministers, former prime ministers, the Secretary General himself are all hinting that they're about to do something incredibly stupid. And we're all going to pay the price. Very likely. Now, before I talk about the unending acrimony between East and West, I must send my respects and my condolences to those shop owners in France who are currently having their shops firebombed by the disgruntled rioters as a result of the French rendition of the George Floyd protests. Unfortunately, because of all the socioeconomic situations that are being agitated by various demographical issues that are induced by rapid immigration, not that nice time-released immigration, but the kind of immigration where the elites need a bigger tax base and they need it fast, so they just open the floodgates, that whole thing. Well, it's a good thing for the police, because in the upcoming age of austerity that awaits France and other European countries who've now been separated from cheap Russian gas, things are only going to get worse. Okay, the price of everything is going to get worse because the price of energy is about to explode. When the price of energy explodes, it's going to lead to more poverty, which is going to lead to more crime, which is going to lead to more drug use, which is going to lead to more riotous behavior in general. And that is going to require a sizable police force to keep all the poor people in line. And I must congratulate Macron on being ahead of the curve in this one. He can use this as justification to usher in a nice, healthy police state to keep everybody in line. And that's what's coming to all of the democratic countries. You see, in Ukraine, they got it figured out. You just suspend elections until the war is done. And, you ban all these parties and you just, rile up whoever you need. If you got to send them to the front line, that's the way you do it. That's how you do democracy. Just like where Greta Thunberg is today. Now, speaking about Greta Thunberg, the mass fumigation of the East Coast, the result of the Canadian wildfires, with a record-shattering wildfires, okay, is ongoing. We're not even halfway through the season. And by an order of magnitude, the average amount of area burned in Canada every year is 250,000 acres, okay, or hectares. Forgive me. This year, it is already around 7 million hectares, and we're not even halfway through the season. It's gonna get ugly. But don't worry, Trudeau and Buckingham Palace bros, they're all going to forgo their lap of luxury, and they're going to reduce their carbon footprint. They're going to live in tiny houses. They're going to set an example for the rest of us. In fact, you know what? They're going to even get rid of their guns because they don't need those either. Why should they just be the ones that have personal bodyguards with armed concealed carry, right? Don't worry, they're going to get rid of that. Okay, they're going to lead by example here. So it's all going to be good. And they're sending Greta to talk with Zelensky to work it out. But all jokes aside, guys, we're about to see a colossal escalation in this conflict, the likes of which we haven't seen since it started. Now, recall just a year ago, to think about Ukraine being incorporated into NATO was unthinkable. You couldn't imagine it because it was the ultimate stated red line. This was the reason for the Minsk agreements in the first place. Now they are openly talking about it. And if you don't believe me, listen to what Liz Truss has to say. Sorry you had to look at this for so long. I get ranting and rolling.
Speaker, It's clear that Putin has been significantly weakened in Russia, and we must not use this time to let up in our support for Ukraine. So first of all, we need to make sure that Ukrainian membership of NATO is fast-tracked at the Vilnius NATO summit. Secondly, we need to make sure there is no talk of deals or concessions or lifting of sanctions on Russia in any circumstances until the war criminals are held to account. And finally, we and our allies, including the Ukrainians, including the Poles, including the Baltic states, need to make sure that we have a plan in the case of the implosion of Russia. Liz Truss.
All right, so what did she just say? She said we got 14 days to get our affairs in order. Think about what she just said. For starters, she's not the one on the front lines. It's the Ukrainians are the ones who are on the front lines. So she can say whatever she wants because she doesn't have to answer to her own constituents about all the soldiers that are coming back in body bags. At least not the mercenary ones, or not the actual soldiers. The mercenary ones, they might have to take accountability for that at some point in time. But it's very easy for them to expend Ukrainian life when it's just a dollar amount. And this is why they're so gung-ho, and this is why they think they're getting a good deal right now. We talk about the billions and possibly, when this thing is said and done, trillions of dollars being sent to Ukraine. But if you don't have to expend your own population, then your population will probably go for it because the war is over there and not over here. But the other absurd thing she said was the implosion of Russia, bringing Putin into The Hague, things which are just never going to happen, fast-tracking Ukraine into NATO. Now get a load of this. You have Jens Stoltenberg and the Prime Minister of Estonia both saying that there's going to be a big surprise unveiled in Vilnius. Vilnius, I should add, currently surrounded by Patriot missile defense systems and a whole lot of high-tech military hardware, because all of these things happen to converge at the same time that tactical nukes are in Belarus, and Wagner just happens to be exiled to Belarus and already has set up a camp for 8,000 guys, as confirmed by satellite photo released today. Now, they've said that there's some big surprises coming and that Ukraine can expect that they're going to get more than expected, or in the very least, something that they'll see as satisfactory. What they want is security guarantees, which means, in some people's mind, the extreme version of that is no-fly zone. Or if you attack past this point, Article 5 gets invoked. Effectively, NATO membership with the Article 5 part without NATO membership, more or less. Or, so they get the security guarantees, or the actual fast-track approach to NATO membership. Now, Ben Wallace, the defense minister of the UK, and the UK is the ones that are the most vocal about this, he says that they should just scrap the whole thing that they call the membership action plan. Like, you have to go through this set of hoops in order to become a NATO member. For one, there can't be geopolitical, there can't be economic instability. You have to have a sound democratic society, not one in a perpetual state of martial law where you've banned other parties and you've banned elections outright, and you're basically picking anybody, any able-bodied male off the street between the age of 1865 and throwing into the meat grinder at will. It can't be that. So you typically need what's called a membership action plan. That's what Finland had to go through, and then all the countries have to vote as to whether or not they want that party to be allowed into NATO. This is why Sweden is having issues, because Turkey's the holdout because of stuff I'm not entirely aware of, but it has something to do with anti-Turkish sentiment in Sweden by various factions of whoever. Anyways, so they want to scrap that all together, and they want to just say, you know what? We need Ukraine, and here's the reason why Ben Wallace gave. And this was just like, blew my mind, because he said the quiet part out loud. Think about this. Ben Wallace, the UK defense minister, said that the reason why we need Ukraine in NATO, or one of the primary reasons, is because they have the biggest, most capable, most experienced military in NATO. And it got me thinking about something. Got me thinking, like, let's say I'm Ukraine. That's Russia over there. I'm fighting Russia. I'm not sure how this, I guess I should go this way. Okay, so this is Russia, because this is the east, for your guys' point of view. So I'm fighting Russia over here, right? And I don't have enough weapons. Apparently this GDP, this golden billion, trillions and trillions of dollars of money and weapons and all this stuff, they can only send me 10 tanks, all right? So I'm doing what I can. You know, I'm really brave and I'm really smart, and I'm trying to, you know, fight these Ruskies, this nuclear colossal superpower, with everything I got. And I'm just saying, can't you just send me some more stuff? You send me one of those old 100,000 planes you have over there? No, it's a logistical issue. We can't quite do it yet. What do you mean you can't do it? You could send me all kinds of stuff and I could just take this guy right now. Yeah, well, here's the reason. If you're familiar with the Machiavellian style of power and control, you'll know that you always want to keep your subordinates just a little bit hungry. You never want to give them so much power that they could turn around and say, you know what, I'm tired of fighting this guy. We're the most experienced. We know how to fight a high-intensity war in ways that you simply don't and probably never will, because you're too chicken and you'd rather sit in here and talk. So I think we're just going to go this way instead of that way now. Do you think that's why they're not sending what they could there? Because if you think that NATO can't do more to help Ukraine right now because of logistical issues, they can't have more than 30 Abrams tanks by the end of the year, don't give me that bullshit. That is nonsense. I got beachfront property to sell you up there in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Yeah, sure, just call me up and we'll make a deal. All right, little inside joke for all you Saskatchewanians out there. Guys, it's because they don't want them to get too powerful. They don't want them to, and this is just, I'm just riffing here. Something to think about. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I'm just saying maybe they don't want them too powerful. Maybe they don't want the technology to fall into the other side's hands, the Russians' hands. But I don't even think it's that at this point, because the Russians have comparable technology in all domains of warfare. It's maybe slightly better in certain places. The West, in terms of some of their technology they have, but it's not reliable for high-intensity grinding in the mud day after day conflict. It doesn't require 15 guys to maintain, okay? The Russians are probably content with the weapons they have. I'm sure they would get a hold of the Russian weapons or the NATO weapons, and they'd be like, well, that's great, but you know, it only lasts a day without breaking down and for us having to fix it. So I think that that's part of it, and I think that part of the reason why the Russians aren't going hard as a mofo in Ukraine right now, and this has been articulated by a Russian academic, a Russian member of the Duma, I do believe, who's basically said that the reason why they don't want to wage total war in Ukraine is because a good chunk of them speak Russian. A good chunk of them are Russian. In fact, they are Slavic people. And here's something for you to think about. Could it be that Vladimir Putin, in his infinite Machiavellian wisdom, however you want to look at Putin, okay? You think he's a good guy or bad guy, it doesn't matter. Could it be that he thinks that the Ukrainians are being held hostage by NATO and the puppet regime? Is that what I'm not saying that's what I think. I'm just saying maybe that's what they think. Maybe that's why they're withholding. Now, we've known why Putin has been withholding for one of the reasons, and this is why he's having problems with his generals. They don't play the big strategic, big think game that Putin does. His generals are there on the ground. They're saying, why don't you give us what we can to finish this war? Putin's saying, just wait, because NATO's about to do something really stupid. They're about to get involved in this war. That's why we need to have these 1 million guys surrounding Ukraine just in case shit pops off. So Putin is saying, just stay calm, everybody stay cool, all of my different synoptical generals that I keep fighting with one another and my Chechen pit bull over here, you know, incredibly wise, right? Because he knows that at some point NATO very well may get involved in this conflict, and that is when he has to be able to counter them with a sizable conventional force. If he depletes that force in Ukraine, then all he has left is nuclear weapons, and then it's instantaneous nuclear Armageddon. But I do believe that there's members of Russia, the Russian government and Russian society, who obviously believe that they have that Slavic brotherhood with many people in Ukraine, with the exception of maybe that line gets divided somewhere where the Poles lay claim to Western Ukraine. But I do believe that maybe that's why they are not just indiscriminately carpet bombing and are trying to pay some attention to, minimizing collateral damage in this conflict, because they understand that there's a regime right now who has imposed martial law, is forcing any man by the age of 18 to 65 to the meat grinder, who has suspended elections, who is meeting with Greta Thunberg to discuss the carbon footprint of Nord Stream and other things. And that's what's going on. Maybe. I'm a maybe kind of guy, all right? What else is going on in the world today? I don't know. Let's check it out. Oh boy. Haven't even started the damn video yet. The photometer is at 87. The markets still don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. The price of gold is going down, but the US dollar is going up because nobody knows what to do. Everybody's looking for a safe haven. Never worry about the price of gold. I think we're one major moral event away from the moral outrage that is going to be required to kickstart this Ukrainian support to the next level. Again, they could send Ukraine a lot more weapons. Yes, you have to be trained in those weapons. That's maybe the only real sticking point to all of this, but they could have committed to training many more soldiers a long time ago, and they could have started that process last year. I think the reason why they're not doing it is less because we don't have the capability. Look, if we wanted to, we could mobilize on an industrial scale to provide little old Ukraine with the munitions they need to keep this conflict going and to turn the tides and to really provide that main thrust of the counteroffensive that we're about to see during the Vilnius summit, because Ukraine has to show something. Right around the time, I do believe that between now and July 11th and 12th, you're going to see the main thrust of the counteroffensive. It may well come across the Dnieper River. Let's see if I have that link here somewhere. In the Kherson direction, okay? I guess I'll just show you on the map here. That's why we have maps. That's why we use a map in this show. So in and around that, you don't need to know the exact region here. Let me move this picture if you want to know the details. But there's some suspicion that the Ukrainians are starting to amass troops in and around this region here that was flooded out by the dam that's now dried out. And so there's this bridge. I believe I can't remember exactly what it's called. Something Kakovka or Arikovka. I can't remember. Let me just see if I can find it on here. I think it's this one here. It's not even listed anymore. It's right around there. Anyways, the Ukrainians are trying to establish a bridgehead with pontoon bridges because the bridge is blown. Okay, but apparently they're hiding under this bridge and they're trying to amass force under this bridgehead. It's kind of like a D-Day situation, but a much smaller scale. There's only like 100 guys there right now, but they're saying that they could eventually start to concentrate forces. They're already starting to concentrate forces in Nikopol and Mykolaiv, and they're getting ready to do some major offensive where they come down and they come across the river and then they go right into Crimea, or at least they initiate that process. And in initiating that process around the time of the summit, that might embolden all of the participants of the summit to agree to some measure of security guarantees for Ukraine. Okay, it's almost like they want them to prove themselves, to prove that you're not going to turn around and kill us, right? Type thing. I don't know. Anyways, we also got a situation right now where we got large nuclear accident drills that are ongoing They're giving out potassium iodide. That's this stuff right here. This is the brand ThyroSafe. This stuff has a long expiration date, 2032, and that is just what's recommended. This stuff can probably last for decades after that. And you can get that at CanadianPreparedness.com. An absolute must. You're not a World War III nuclear prepper until you have some ThyroSafe. And I'm telling you, when the first bomb drops or when the first nuclear incident comes up, if there's an electrical problem at the power plant, or there's just some sort of issue that arises where they can't keep the spent fuel rods cool, and there's fighting in around that region, and there's a radiological release, then you're going to see the demand for global potassium iodide skyrocket. Okay, they're already doing drills in the Zaporozhye region, actual nuclear drills. They're handing out potassium iodide to children now. They're doing a lot more televised programming about nuclear incidents and what to worry about, what not to worry about. They're even trying to alleviate people's fears about if there's a nuclear bomb in another city, don't worry, because if you're not in the 5 kilometer blast zone or whatever it is, that there's nothing to worry about. They forget to mention, of course, the radioactive cloud that will likely follow the nuclear detonation. Now, you're likely not going to see ground bursts, which are going to be far worse for radioactivity. But if the Russians were to theoretically use a nuke, which at this point in time, it appears anyways that they don't need to, but it all depends on who you're listening to, because there's so many people who seem to have everything figured out here, but they're all basing their intel on what the American government and the intelligence agencies reveal to the public. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and we rightly shouldn't know. There's a lot of things about the Ukrainian military, their capabilities, that obviously they would want to keep that top secret. So it should come as no surprise that we don't know the true numbers of how many troops they have left, of how many pieces of equipment they have left, of what the casualty and attrition rate is. So all these people who are speaking so confidently, like they have confirmation of what is going on, I would take that all with a grain of salt. Anyways, I would show you the actual preparation video that they're doing, but because of YouTube policies, the algorithm might misconstrue it as something else. But Ukraine is taking seriously the prospect of either a meltdown situation or a situation where they just have some level of radiological incident at the nuclear power plant. They're taking it very seriously. If that were to happen around the time of the Vilnius summit, you'd have every excuse that you needed to push them over the edge, to give some measure of security guarantee, or to get some sort of coalition force, be it from Poland or Lithuania, the Baltic states, to go in there into Western Ukraine anyways. And that's when Article 5 comes into play. Okay, some peacekeeping force. It'll probably come in under the guise of peacekeeping. All right. What else do we got to talk about today? This is what I was referencing. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, speaking in Brussels at a joint press conference with NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg, promised a surprise on NATO's membership at the bloc's July summit in Vilnius. By surprise, do they mean a mushroom cloud? It's very, very possible. Retired U.S. colonel, NATO guarantees to Ukraine may trigger nuclear war with Russia. They're not talking about Douglas McGregor. They're talking about Daniel Davis. Tell us something we don't know. Oh, here's a picture of... I feel sorry for Greta, too. She's young. She's naive. She doesn't understand the geopolitical state of affairs. And maybe I'm not giving her too much credit, but this is just weird. Like, what is this all about? This is such virtue signaling at its most cringe. This is the most sanctimonious image I've ever seen. You literally have... I'm not even going to get into it. I've already shot myself in the foot one too many times here. That's why a great way to support the channel, CanadianPreparedness.com. The best prepping gear money can buy in the world. This is funny to me because you really got to meditate on this image if you really want to know what's going on in the world, okay? So we presume that the Russians are evil, right? They're the ones who've had their country invaded God knows how many times. They share this cultural and ethnic affinity with surrounding nations, in spite of denials of various populations within those nations. And it's just this sea of blue, and you have these holdouts here, and then of course this being the front, right? This is literally the translation of Ukraine, I believe, is frontier. And that's Russia's final straw. And I would just encourage you to really meditate on this image every once in a while if you really want to truly understand what is going on in this ongoing acrimony between East and West. We got ATACMS coming to Ukraine. Joe says, we're not ready to do that yet. They'll do it. I mean, they already have not the Taurus, but the Storm Shadow there. So this is how they do it. This is how NATO mission creeps into the conflict, is one country will give Storm Shadow missiles. And instead of that same country, putting themselves in the hot seat, they'll get another country to send another piece of equipment, which is slightly better next, right? So you had, the U.S., okay, we'll send HIMARS, right? And then so the Germans said, okay, well, we'll send tanks. And then the Brits said, okay, well, we'll send Storm Shadows. So it has to be, one of those three is going to send something next. So that's what's going on. What else do we got to talk about today? Yeah, okay, this is the guy I was talking about. Sergei Karaganov. Here's why Russia has to consider launching a nuclear strike on Western Europe. Notice he didn't say Eastern Europe. I hope we never use nuclear weapons, but the fact we refuse to allow their use in all situations, except in the case of mortal danger to the state, itself seems to me quite reckless. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you go and you read this guy's article, it's not Medvedev level of nuclear rhetoric, okay? He's actually quite sober in his thinking here, and I would say quite realistic in terms of the probability of nuclear weapons being used. But I'll just read the rest of this excerpt for you. But the question is, who could and should be the target of such an attack? The Americans, as we all know, have been shamelessly lying when they say that we're preparing to drop an atomic bomb in Ukraine. This is monstrous nonsense, absolutely malicious, because of course the Ukrainians are a miserable, deluded people who are being driven to slaughter, but they are still our people, and we are not going to hit them. A very important statement. He is saying, because of course, in his mind now, I'm not saying that he speaks for Ukrainians or that I view Ukrainians this way, but it's important to understand the Russian thinking. Ukrainians are a miserable, deluded people who are being driven to slaughter, but they are still our people, and we are not going to hit them. If there were to be nuclear strikes, they should be aimed at countries in Western Europe that have been most supportive of the mercenary regime in Kiev. Now, you might think that would be incredibly reckless for them to do that, because it would immediately beget a nuclear response from the United States. But he goes on to argue that he doesn't think that the United States would actually get involved in that capacity, and that that's all a front, and that they would get involved in some limited capacity like they're getting into now, and that Article 5 is just basically a paper tiger, so to speak. I guess we'll find out. I've went on a little long today, and I'm running out of tape here as usual, but China has been conjuring a World War Z scenario, an all-out test of conflict, so they're exercising total war. Taiwan has issued shoot and down and destroy orders for Chinese balloons if they pose a risk. There's been lots of incursions into Taiwanese airspace as of late. This is Putin posing with his, he's called his pit bull. Again, guys, you got to understand the reason why Putin is a genius. You got the FSB, you got the Russian MOD, you got the Chechens, you got the People's Republic of the Donbass, you got the Belarusians, you got the Wagners. He only needs 2 of these groups to secure power. Okay, I'm making a whole video on this because it's so fascinating to me, this strategy of maintaining power. The downside of this approach is that because you have all these conflicting groups, it's called synoptical surveillance, where people police one another. It's great, meaning that you never have to worry about being overthrown, because you can always just bring in your boy Kadyrov here if the Wagner guys get out of hand, right? And Kadyrov outnumbers the Wagner troops, and they're as experienced, they're good fighters. So, and this is why Putin made this pose. How much time do I got left? I'm just ranting away here. So it's fascinating, the strategy that he's using in order to maintain power. But the limit of that is that you don't have that cohesiveness. You don't have that integration at all levels of the military that would allow you to function in a very efficient manner and prosecute this war in a way which was more optimal. But I'm going to do a whole video on that in the near future. Now, in terms of the Serovikin stuff, the New York Times is saying that one of their top generals, the guy that oversees the entire conflict in Ukraine, that he is in a jail cell and that he's been threatened. That's all nonsense. It's not happening. It's likely that if he did know something about the coup that was about to happen, it was only in the sense that, and he might agree with some of the sentiment of the Wagner group, that the Russian MOD was not coordinating the conflict as efficiently as it could have been, but it doesn't seem to be the kind of guy who would support a coup. Now, that's just my take on the situation. Apparently, there are witnesses who say he's at work, he's not on house arrest and all this stuff. But we'll talk more about that next time. Yes, the smoke is here to stay. Get your fire masks at CanadianPreparedness.com. Air quality is absolutely abysmal on the East Coast. And Google is going to start blocking the Canadian news because the Canadian government doesn't like the fact that social media people can share information freely. I'll talk more about that next time. Thanks for watching, guys. Canadian Prepper out.